The blizzard howled with such ferocity that Miranda Keller could no longer feel her fingers gripping the reins, and she knew with absolute certainty that if she did not find shelter within the next hour, she would freeze to death alone in the Wyoming wilderness. The stagecoach had overturned 3 miles back when the horses spooked at a snow-covered boulder, sending her tumbling into a world of white chaos while the driver and other passengers scattered in different directions, each person frantically seeking salvation in their own way. She had chosen to follow what she thought was a road, but the snow had erased all traces of civilization, leaving her wandering through an endless frozen nightmare on foot, her thin traveling coat offering no protection against the vicious wind that cut through fabric and flesh like 1,000 knives. Miranda was 23 years old, a schoolteacher from Boston who had been foolish enough to accept a position in a small Montana settlement, lured by promises of adventure and a fresh start after a broken engagement to a banker's son who had decided that her independent spirit was unsuitable for a proper wife. She had wanted to prove something to herself, to show that she could survive beyond the confines of drawing rooms and tea parties, but now that desire seemed like the height of arrogance as she stumbled through snow that reached her knees, her dark hair plastered to her face with ice, her blue eyes streaming tears that froze on her cheeks. Just when she was certain she would collapse and let the snow bury her, a structure materialized through the white curtain ahead. At first, she thought it was a hallucination, a cruel trick of her dying mind, but as she forced herself forward, the building solidified into reality. It was a cabin, sturdy and well-built, with smoke rising from a stone chimney. Light glowed from a window, promising warmth and life and hope. Miranda tried to call out, but her voice was lost in the wind. She stumbled forward, nearly falling, and somehow made it to the door. Her frozen hands could barely form a fist, but she pounded against the wood with what little strength remained, each knock weaker than the last. The door opened so suddenly that she fell forward into a pair of strong arms that caught her before she hit the floor. "Jesus Christ," a deep voice said, and then she was being lifted and carried into blessed warmth. The contrast was so sharp that it hurt, and Miranda gasped as sensation began to return to her numb limbs in waves of pins and needles. She was set down on something soft near a blazing fire, and through her blurred vision she saw a man's face hovering above her, his expression a mixture of shock and concern. "Can you hear me?" he asked, his voice urgent. "Miss, can you understand what I am saying?" Miranda tried to respond, but her jaw was too frozen to form words. She managed a small nod, and the man immediately began removing her ice-encrusted coat with careful efficiency. "I am going to get these wet clothes off you before you lose any fingers or toes to frostbite," he explained, his tone professional but kind. "I will be as respectful as possible, but we need to warm you up quickly. Do you understand?" Another nod. Miranda was beyond caring about propriety at this point. She was alive, and that was all that mattered. The man worked quickly, removing her sodden outer layers while leaving her undergarments in place, then wrapping her in what felt like a dozen warm blankets. He brought a cup to her lips, and she tasted something hot and slightly bitter. "Just warm water with a bit of whiskey," he said. "Drink slowly. Your body needs to warm up gradually." Miranda sipped obediently, feeling the liquid burn a path down her throat and into her stomach. As the minutes passed and the warmth seeped into her bones, she was finally able to focus on her rescuer. He was a man in his late 20s, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark blonde hair that fell just past his collar and eyes the color of storm clouds. His face was rugged, weathered by sun and wind, with strong features that spoke of both strength and gentleness. He wore simple working clothes, a flannel shirt and worn denim pants, and his hands were calloused from hard labor. "Thank you," Miranda finally managed to whisper, her voice hoarse and cracking. "I thought I was going to die out there." "You nearly did," he replied, settling back on his heels to study her with those penetrating gray eyes. "What in God's name were you doing out in this storm?" "Do you have any idea how dangerous it is, the stagecoach?" she said, her teeth still chattering slightly. "It overturned. We all scattered. I was trying to find help." His expression darkened with worry. "How many others were there?" "4. The driver, another woman, and 2 men. We all went different directions." He stood up, running a hand through his hair in a gesture that seemed habitual. "I need to go out and search for them, but I cannot leave you alone yet. You are still too weak." He seemed to be wrestling with a difficult decision, his jaw tight with tension. "I will be fine," Miranda said, even though the thought of him leaving terrified her. "Please, if there are others out there who need help." He looked at her for a long moment, then shook his head. "The storm is too bad right now. I would not make it 50 feet from the cabin without losing my bearings. We will have to wait until it dies down and pray that the others found shelter somewhere." The guilt in his voice was palpable, but Miranda could see the hard practicality in his eyes. He was a man who understood the harsh realities of survival in this unforgiving land. "What is your name?" she asked, needing to know who had saved her life. "Graham Prescott," he answered, moving to the stove to pour more hot water. "I run a small ranch about a mile south of here. This is my line cabin, where I stay during the winter when I need to check on the cattle in the northern pastures." "And you are?" "Miranda Keller. I was traveling to Montana to take a teaching position." Graham returned with another cup of warm liquid, this time with a hint of something sweet. "Well, Miss Keller, I am afraid your journey has been delayed. This storm looks like it is settling in for a few days at least, and even when it clears, the roads will be impassable for a while. You are welcome to stay here until it is safe to travel." "I could not impose," Miranda said automatically, though she had no idea what alternative she could possibly have. "It is not an imposition when it is a matter of survival," Graham said firmly. "Besides, I could use the company. Winter up here gets lonely." He said it lightly, but Miranda caught a glimpse of something deeper in his expression, a hint of the isolation that came with this kind of life. As the evening wore on, Miranda began to feel more like herself. Graham prepared a simple but hearty meal of salt pork, beans, and cornbread, apologizing for the lack of variety. "I was not expecting company," he said with a slight smile that transformed his serious face into something warmer and more approachable. "It is wonderful," Miranda assured him, and she meant it. After hours of thinking she would die in the snow, a hot meal in a warm cabin felt like the greatest luxury imaginable. They ate in comfortable silence for a while, the wind howling outside like a living thing trying to claw its way inside. "How long have you lived out here?" Miranda asked, curious about this man who had appeared like an angel in her darkest moment. "Born in Colorado, came up to Wyoming about 7 years ago," Graham replied, leaning back in his chair. "Bought the ranch with money I saved working as a ranch hand and cowboy on various spreads. It is not much, but it is mine. 300 acres, about 50 head of cattle, a few horses. I do most of the work myself, hire a couple of hands in the spring and summer for roundup and branding." "That sounds like incredibly hard work." "It is," he agreed, "but it is honest work and I am my own man. No one tells me what to do or how to do it. That freedom is worth all the hardship." Miranda understood that sentiment more than he probably realized. "I suppose that is why I took the teaching job," she admitted. "I wanted to prove I could make my own way in the world, that I was more than just someone's future wife. Graham's eyes sharpened with interest. You were engaged, nearly. He proposed, I accepted, and then he spent the next 3 months trying to change everything about me. He wanted a silent, obedient wife who would sit prettily in his parlor and never express an opinion. When I refused to become that person, he broke it off and told everyone that I was too headstrong and unfeminine for marriage. The words still stung, even months later. Then he was a fool, Graham said bluntly. Begging your pardon for being forward, but any man who wants a woman with no spirit or intelligence is not looking for a partner. He is looking for a decoration. Miranda felt warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the fire. Thank you for saying that. My family certainly did not see it that way. They were mortified by the scandal. Families can be complicated, Graham said, and something in his tone suggested he had his own stories there. Before she could ask, he stood up and began gathering the dishes. You should get some rest. You have been through an ordeal today. You can have the bed. I will sleep on the floor by the fire. I cannot take your bed, Miranda protested. You can and you will, Graham said in a tone that brooked no argument. You are still recovering from nearly freezing to death. The bed has more blankets and will be warmer. I have slept on worse than a floor, I promise you. Too tired to argue further, Miranda allowed him to help her to the small bed in the corner of the cabin. It was simple but clean, with several thick quilts that smelled faintly of cedar. As she settled under the covers, still wrapped in her borrowed blankets, she watched Graham bank the fire and arrange his own bedroll on the floor. The domesticity of the scene struck her as oddly intimate, and she felt a flutter of something in her stomach that she could not quite name. Graham. She said softly into the darkness, Yes, thank you for saving my life, for taking me in, for everything. There was a pause, and then his voice came back, low and warm. You are welcome, Miranda. Sleep well. She did sleep, more deeply than she had in months, lulled by the sounds of the storm outside and the steady breathing of the man who had rescued her from certain death. The storm continued for 3 full days, the wind screaming around the cabin like a chorus of banshees while snow piled up against the walls in enormous drifts. Miranda and Graham fell into an easy routine that surprised them both with its naturalness. She insisted on helping with the chores despite his protests, and together they cooked meals, maintained the fire, and cared for Graham's horse in the small attached lean-to that served as a stable. During the long hours when there was nothing to do but wait out the weather, they talked. Miranda discovered that Graham was the youngest of 4 brothers, all of whom had stayed back in Colorado to work the family ranch. I wanted something of my own, he explained as they sat by the fire on the second evening, playing cards with a worn deck he kept in a drawer. My oldest brother was going to inherit the main ranch, and the others were content to work under him. I needed to build something myself to prove I could do it. Do you miss them? Miranda asked, studying her cards but more interested in his answer. Sometimes, he admitted. Especially during the holidays, but we write letters and I go visit when I can. They understand why I left. Family is important, but so is following your own path. Miranda told him about growing up in Boston, the youngest daughter of a successful merchant who had expected her to make an advantageous marriage and live a life of comfortable respectability. I loved to read, she said, and I wanted to teach, to help children discover the joy of learning. But that was not considered an appropriate ambition for a young lady of my station. I was supposed to focus on needlework and managing a household and producing children for whatever man my father approved of. So you ran away to become a teacher, Graham said with an approving nod. That took courage. Or stupidity, Miranda replied with a rueful laugh. I nearly froze to death in a blizzard because of my grand adventure. But you did not freeze to death, Graham pointed out, his gray eyes holding hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. You survived. You fought your way through that storm and found help. That is not stupidity, Miranda. That is strength. The way he said her name with such conviction and respect made something shift in her chest. She had known this man for less than 3 days, but she felt more seen and understood by him than she had by anyone in her entire life. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. On the third night, the wind finally began to die down. Graham stood at the window, watching the snow fall in gentler patterns now, no longer driven by gale-force winds. "The storm is breaking," he said quietly. "By tomorrow or the day after, I will be able to get out and search for the other passengers from your stagecoach. And we can start making arrangements to get you on your way to Montana." Miranda felt an unexpected pang at his words. Of course, she needed to continue to her teaching position. She had made a commitment, and lives were depending on her arrival. But the thought of leaving this warm cabin and the man who had shown her such kindness filled her with a sadness she had not anticipated. "Of course," she said, keeping her voice neutral. "I have already imposed on your hospitality for too long." Graham turned from the window, his expression unreadable in the firelight. "You have not imposed, Miranda. I meant what I said. I have enjoyed having you here." "I have enjoyed being here," she admitted, then added with a small smile, even under the circumstances. He moved closer, and Miranda's heart began to beat faster. They had been carefully proper with each other despite the intimate quarters, always maintaining appropriate distance and decorum. But now, with the storm breaking and the reality of her departure looming, something had changed in the air between them. "I want to say something," Graham said, his voice low and rough with emotion, "and I hope you will forgive me if I am overstepping. These past 3 days with you have been some of the best I have had in a very long time. You are intelligent and kind and brave, and I find myself not wanting you to leave. I know that is selfish of me, and I know you have responsibilities waiting for you. But I had to tell you. I had to be honest." Miranda's breath caught in her throat. She could see the vulnerability in his eyes, the fear that he had said too much, revealed too much, and she recognized it because she felt exactly the same way. "I do not want to leave either," she whispered. "I have felt more at home in this simple cabin with you than I ever did in my parents' mansion in Boston. I do not know what that means, but I know it is true." Graham reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to. When she did not move, his rough hand cupped her cheek with infinite gentleness. "I know we have only known each other a few days," he said. "I know this is crazy and impractical and probably a terrible idea, but I have to ask, would you consider staying, not just until the road's clear but longer? Through the spring at least, so we can figure out what this is between us. I have a feeling that if you leave tomorrow, I will regret it for the rest of my life." Miranda leaned into his touch, her eyes closing briefly at the tenderness of it. When she opened them again, she saw everything she was feeling reflected back at her. This man, this near stranger who had saved her life, who had shown her more respect and understanding in 3 days than her own fiancé had in months, was offering her something precious. A chance, a possibility, a future she had not even known she wanted until this moment. "Yes," she said simply, "I will stay until spring. I will stay forever if that is what this becomes." Graham's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. He leaned down slowly, asking permission with his eyes, and when Miranda tilted her face up to his, he kissed her with a sweetness that made her heart soar. It was a kiss full of promise and hope, gentle but passionate, and when they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard. "I promise I will be a gentleman," Graham said, resting his forehead against hers. "We will do this properly. Court like respectable people, even if we are living under the same roof." "I trust you," Miranda said, and realized it was completely true. She did trust this man, in a way she had never trusted her former fiancé. Graham had proven his character through his actions, not his words, and that meant everything. The next morning dawned clear and blindingly bright, the sun reflecting off fresh snow that blanketed the world in white. Graham prepared to go out and search for the other stagecoach passengers, loading supplies onto his horse and checking his rifle. "I do not know how long I will be gone," he told Miranda. "If I find them, I will need to get them to town, which could take most of the day." "Will you be all right here alone?" "I will be fine," Miranda assured him. "I am not the helpless city girl I was when I arrived. You have taught me well these past few days." He grinned at that. "You were never helpless, Miranda. You just needed to find your strength." He pulled her close for a brief, fierce hug. "Keep the fire going. There is plenty of food, and if anything happens, if anyone comes by who makes you uncomfortable, you have the pistol I showed you where I keep it." "Nothing is going to happen," she said, but she appreciated his concern. "Go find those people. They need help." Graham kissed her forehead and headed out into the brilliant white world. Miranda watched from the window as he rode away, his dark figure stark against the snow. Then she turned back to the cabin and set about making it more of a home. She spent the day cleaning and organizing, doing laundry and cooking, tasks that would have seemed tedious back in Boston, but now felt purposeful and satisfying. She found herself humming as she worked, feeling a contentment she had not experienced in years. This simple life, working with her hands and creating a comfortable space, felt right in a way that all the fancy parties and social obligations never had. Graham returned as the sun was setting, his face grim. He was alone except for the horse. Miranda's heart sank as she opened the door to let him in. "You did not find them," she said. "I found them," Graham replied heavily. "All 4 of them. They had taken shelter in a rock outcropping about 2 miles from here. The driver and one of the men made it. They had started a fire and survived the storm. I got them back to Willow Creek, the nearest town. They are cold and tired, but they will recover." "And the others?" Miranda asked, though she already knew the answer from the look on his face. "The woman and the other man did not survive. They had wandered away from the shelter looking for more wood and got lost in the storm. I found their bodies about a quarter-mile from the rocks. They froze to death." Miranda felt tears spring to her eyes for the 2 strangers who had shared her doomed stagecoach journey. "I am so sorry." "The driver told me to give you a message," Graham continued, pulling off his frozen gloves and coat. "He said the stagecoach company will send a replacement coach through in about 2 weeks, weather permitting, and you are welcome to take that to Montana. He also said he understands if you want to file a complaint against the company for the accident." 2 weeks. Miranda had 2 weeks before she had to make a final decision about Montana, about teaching, about the life she had planned. 2 weeks to figure out if what she felt for Graham was real or just gratitude and proximity. It should have felt like pressure, but instead it felt like a gift. Time, to be sure, for both of them. "Thank you for telling me," she said, helping him out of his snow-crusted outer layers. "And thank you for going out there. I know it was dangerous." "It was necessary," Graham said simply. "Those people deserve to be found, living or dead. Their families deserve to know what happened." He looked exhausted, physically and emotionally drained by the grim task he had performed. Miranda guided him to a chair by the fire and brought him hot coffee and the stew she had made while he was gone. "Eat," she commanded gently, "and rest. You have done more than anyone could ask today." As Graham ate, Miranda told him about her day, the small domestic details that normally would bore a man but that he listened to with genuine interest. "You made the place look real nice," he said, glancing around at her efforts. "Feels more lived in." "It feels like home," Miranda said softly, and the words hung in the air between them. Full of meaning over the next 2 weeks, Miranda and Graham settled into a routine that felt like a marriage without the legal ties. They worked together during the day, Graham teaching her about ranch life while Miranda introduced small touches of comfort to the cabin. In the evenings, they talked for hours, sharing their hopes and dreams and fears. They learned each other's histories, their quirks and preferences, in the compressed timeline that crisis creates. Graham was patient with his courtship, never pushing for more than Miranda was ready to give. They shared kisses that grew progressively more passionate, but he always stopped before things went too far, mindful of her reputation and his promise to be a gentleman. "When we make love," he told her one night as they sat tangled together on the small sofa he had brought from his Maine ranch house, "it will be as husband and wife, with no regrets and no shame." "Are you proposing to me, Graham Prescott?" Miranda asked, her heart hammering in her chest. "Not yet," he said with a smile. "But I will if you stay. If you decide that this life is what you want, I will not trap you with a proposal before you are ready to make that choice." Miranda appreciated his restraint, even as part of her wanted to throw caution to the wind and say yes to everything he might offer. But he was right. This decision was too important to make in the heat of passion. She needed to be certain that she wanted this life, this man, this future. She spent long hours thinking about what it would mean to stay. She would never be a schoolteacher, would never have the independence she had dreamed of back in Boston. But she would have something else, something perhaps more valuable. She would have partnership, genuine companionship, a shared life built on mutual respect and affection. She would have work that mattered, caring for the animals and the land, creating a home in the wilderness. And she would have Graham, who looked at her like she was the most precious thing in his world. The 2 weeks passed faster than Miranda wanted. The replacement stagecoach arrived on a clear, cold morning, the driver calling out from the road below the cabin. Graham and Miranda stood on the porch together, watching the coach wait for her. "I will support whatever you decide," Graham said quietly, though she could see the tension in his shoulders, the fear in his eyes that she might leave. "If you need to go to Montana, if you need to fulfill that obligation and try that life, I understand. I will wait for you. If you want to come back, my door will always be open." Miranda looked at the stagecoach, then back at the cabin, and finally at Graham's beloved face. The choice, when it came down to it, was surprisingly easy. "I am not getting on that coach," she said. "This is where I belong. With you." The relief and joy that flooded Graham's expression was beautiful to see. He swept her into his arms, lifting her feet off the ground as he spun her around. "Are you sure?" he asked, setting her down but keeping his arms around her. "Are you absolutely certain? Because once I ask you what I am about to ask you, there is no going back for me." "I am sure," Miranda said firmly. "I have never been more sure of anything in my life." Graham took a deep breath and then, to her surprise, dropped to one knee right there in the snow. From his pocket, he pulled a simple gold band. "This was my grandmother's ring," he said. "It is not fancy, but it is all I have to offer you besides my heart and my name and this life we could build together. Miranda Keller, will you marry me? Will you be my wife and my partner and the person I come home to every night for the rest of my life?" "Yes," Miranda said, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, yes, yes." Graham slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly as if it had been made for her. Then he stood and kissed her deeply, passionately, a kiss full of promise and commitment and love. From the road below, the stagecoach driver called out a congratulations, then snapped the reins and drove away, leaving Miranda to her new life. They were married 3 days later by the circuit preacher in Willow Creek, a small town about 10 miles from Graham's ranch. The ceremony was simple, held in the modest church with only a handful of witnesses, including the shopkeeper and his wife, the town doctor, and a few of Graham's neighboring ranchers. Miranda wore a simple blue dress borrowed from the shopkeeper's wife, with wildflowers in her hair that Graham had somehow found for her despite the winter season, preserved from someone's summer garden. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Graham kissed her with such tenderness that Miranda felt her heart might burst from happiness. This was nothing like the grand society wedding her parents had planned for her back in Boston, but it was infinitely more meaningful. This marriage was her choice, based on love and respect rather than social obligation or financial advantage. The neighboring ranchers threw them a small celebration at the town's only saloon, which had been temporarily converted into a respectable gathering space for the occasion. There was music and dancing, and Miranda found herself swept into the arms of various cowboys and ranchers' wives who welcomed her warmly into their community. These people understood the value of a good woman willing to brave the harsh realities of frontier life, and they treated her with a respect and admiration she had never received in Boston's rigid social circles. "You are going to fit in just fine here," said Martha Jenkins, the wife of Graham's nearest neighbor. She was a sturdy woman in her 40s with kind eyes and work-roughened hands. "We can always use another sensible woman in these parts. Too many men, not enough civilization." "I am looking forward to being part of the community," Miranda said honestly. "And I would be grateful for any advice you can give me about managing a ranch household. I have a lot to learn." "You will learn fast," Martha assured her. "And Graham is a good man. He will be patient with you." She lowered her voice conspiratorially. "He has been alone out here for too long. It will do him good to have a wife to come home to." As the evening wore on, Miranda watched Graham across the room, seeing him relaxed and happy as he talked with the other ranchers. He caught her eye and smiled, that special smile that was just for her, and she felt a warm glow of belonging. This was her life now. These were her people. And the man walking toward her, holding out his hand to lead her into a dance, was her husband, Mrs. Prescott, Graham said formally, though his eyes sparkled with joy and a hint of mischief. "Would you do me the honor of this dance?" "I would be delighted, Mr. Prescott," Miranda replied, taking his hand and allowing him to lead her onto the makeshift dance floor. They danced to a fiddle tune, Graham's strong arms guiding her through the steps. He was surprisingly graceful for such a large man, and Miranda found herself following his lead easily. "I did not know you could dance," she murmured, looking up at him. "There are a lot of things you do not know about me yet," he replied with a grin. "We have a lifetime to discover them all." "A lifetime sounds perfect," Miranda said, resting her head against his chest as they swayed together. She could hear his heartbeat, strong and steady, and knew that she had made the right choice. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. They spent their wedding night at the cabin, having ridden back through the cold darkness under a sky brilliant with stars. Graham carried her over the threshold in the traditional way, both of them laughing like children. Once inside, with the door closed and the fire built up to warm the space, they stood facing each other with a mixture of anticipation and nervousness. "I have never done this before," Miranda admitted, her cheeks flushing. "I mean, I know the basics, but I have no practical experience." Graham cupped her face in his hands, his expression tender. "Neither have I," he confessed. "I wanted to wait for the right woman for my wife. So we will figure it out together, all right." There is no rush, no pressure. We have all night and every night after this for the rest of our lives." His honesty and vulnerability made Miranda love him even more. She reached up and kissed him, pouring all her feelings into it. What followed was tentative at first, as they slowly removed each other's clothing and explored this new intimacy. Graham was patient and gentle, always checking to make sure Miranda was comfortable, and she tried to match his consideration with her own willingness to be open and vulnerable with him. Their lovemaking was sweet and passionate, awkward in moments but made perfect by the genuine affection and respect they had for each other. When it was over, they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, breathing hard and holding each other close. "I love you," Graham whispered into her hair. "I should have said it before, but I love you, Miranda. I think I started falling in love with you the moment you collapsed into my arms covered in snow." "I love you too," Miranda replied, her voice thick with emotion. "I never believed in love at first sight until I met you. But this feels right, Graham. It feels like coming home." They fell asleep in each other's arms, warm and safe and happier than either of them had ever been. The winter months that followed were both challenging and wonderful. Miranda learned the hard realities of ranch life, discovering that the romantic notions she had harbored about frontier living did not match the difficult daily work required to survive. There was water to haul and heat, cooking to do with limited ingredients, laundry to wash in frigid conditions, and endless tasks related to keeping the animals alive through the brutal Wyoming winter. Graham worked tirelessly, checking on his cattle in all weather conditions, breaking ice on water sources, distributing hay he had stored during the previous summer. There were days when he came home so exhausted he could barely eat before collapsing into bed, and Miranda learned to have hot food ready and to massage the knots out of his sore muscles. There were also days when she was equally exhausted from her own work, and Graham would take over the cooking and cleaning without complaint, understanding that partnership meant helping each other through difficult times. But there were beautiful moments too. Quiet evenings by the fire, reading aloud to each other from the few books they possessed, making love in the warm cocoon of their bed while snow fell outside. Teaching each other skills, with Graham showing Miranda how to ride a horse properly, and Miranda teaching Graham to read more fluently, as his education had been limited to basic schooling before he started working full-time. "I always felt stupid around educated people," Graham admitted one evening as they sat at the table practicing reading. "Like I was just a dumb cowboy who was good for physical labor and nothing else." "You are not stupid," Miranda said firmly. "You are one of the most intelligent people I have ever met. You understand animals and weather and the land in ways that take real intelligence. Reading is just a skill that you did not have the opportunity to develop fully, but you are learning fast." Graham looked at her with such gratitude and love that Miranda felt tears spring to her eyes. "You make me want to be better," he said quietly. "You make me believe I can be more than I thought possible." "You were already more than you thought possible," Miranda replied. "I just help you see it." As winter slowly gave way to early spring, the ranch began to transform. The snow melted gradually, revealing brown grass that would soon turn green. Graham's cattle had survived the winter remarkably well, and he was optimistic about the coming year. He hired 2 ranch hands for the spring work, young cowboys named Tom and Billy who were respectful and hard-working. They bunked in a small cabin Graham had built specifically for hired help, and Miranda found herself cooking for 4 instead of 2. She enjoyed the expanded household in a way that surprised her. Back in Boston, she had servants to do the cooking and cleaning, but here, providing meals for the men who worked her husband's land felt purposeful and important. Tom and Billy treated her with the utmost respect, always addressing her as Mrs. Prescott and complimenting her cooking lavishly. "Your wife is a fine woman," Tom told Graham one evening when he did not realize Miranda was within earshot. "You are a lucky man, boss." "I know it," Graham replied, his voice warm with affection. "Luckiest man in Wyoming." Miranda smiled to herself as she finished preparing the meal. She had worried initially that Graham might come to regret marrying her so quickly, that the reality of having a city-bred wife might disappoint him. But he showed her every day through words and actions that he loved her and valued her contribution to their life together. In late April, Miranda realized that her monthly courses had not arrived on schedule. At first, she dismissed it as stress or the physical demands of ranch life affecting her body's rhythms. But when another week passed with no sign of bleeding, she began to suspect the truth. She was pregnant. The realization filled her with a complex mixture of joy and fear. She wanted children with Graham, wanted to build a family with him, but she also knew how dangerous childbirth could be, especially on an isolated ranch far from medical help. Many women died in childbirth or shortly after, and their babies often died with them. It was a reality of frontier life that everyone acknowledged but no one liked to discuss. Miranda decided to wait a bit longer before telling Graham, wanting to be certain before she raised his hopes. She continued with her work, being careful not to lift anything too heavy or overexert herself. She watched for other signs of pregnancy, the nausea that often came in the early months, changes in her breasts, increased fatigue. All the symptoms appeared, confirming her suspicions. Finally, one evening in early May when they were sitting on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold, Miranda took Graham's hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "There is something I need to tell you," she said softly. "We are going to have a baby." Graham's reaction was everything she could have hoped for. His face lit up with pure joy, and he pulled her into his arms, holding her carefully as if she might break. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "As sure as I can be without seeing a doctor," Miranda confirmed. "I think the baby will come in late December or early January." "A Christmas baby," Graham said wonderingly. "Our first child born at Christmas." Then his expression shifted to concern. "Are you all right? Do you feel well? Should you be doing all the work you have been doing?" "I am fine," Miranda assured him, touched by his worry. "Pregnant women have been doing hard work since the beginning of time. I will be careful and I will let you know if I need to reduce my activities. But for now, I am healthy and strong." "We should get you to a doctor," Graham said, already planning. "There is one in Willow Creek, Dr. Matthews. He is a good man. We can ride into town next week and have him confirm everything and tell us what to expect." "That sounds like a good plan," Miranda agreed, relieved that he was taking this seriously but not overreacting. The visit to Dr. Matthews confirmed the pregnancy and provided helpful information about what to expect in the coming months. The doctor was an older man with a kind face and gentle hands, and he examined Miranda thoroughly before pronouncing her and the baby healthy. "You are young and strong," he told them. "That is in your favor, but childbirth on a remote ranch is always risky. I would recommend you come stay in town a few weeks before your due date, so I can be nearby when the baby comes." Graham and Miranda discussed this on the ride back to the ranch. "I do not want to be away from the ranch for weeks," Miranda admitted. "But I also do not want to risk the baby's life or my own." "We will figure it out," Graham said firmly. "Maybe you can stay with Martha Jenkins closer to your time. Their ranch is only an hour from town, much closer than ours. That way you would not be completely separated from ranch life, but you would be near enough to get help quickly if needed." "That might work," Miranda said thoughtfully. "Martha did tell me to reach out if I ever needed anything." As Miranda's pregnancy progressed, she found herself embracing this new phase of life with surprising contentment. Her body changed and grew, accommodating the small life developing inside her. Graham was attentive and loving, often placing his hand on her expanding belly to feel the baby kick. "Hello in there," he would whisper to her stomach. "This is your papa. I cannot wait to meet you." The summer was busy with ranch work. The cattle were moved to higher pastures, and Graham spent long days in the saddle making sure all the animals were accounted for and healthy. Miranda maintained the homestead, tending a vegetable garden she had planted in the spring and preserving food for the coming winter. Her pregnancy slowed her down somewhat, but she remained remarkably active, much to Graham's alternating pride and concern. "You should be resting," he would tell her when he found her working in the garden under the hot sun. "I will rest when the work is done," she would reply with a smile. "Our baby needs food, and food does not grow itself." In August, a letter arrived from Boston. Miranda's father had somehow tracked her down, and his words were cold and formal. He wrote that he and her mother had heard through various channels about her hasty marriage to a Wyoming rancher, and they were deeply disappointed in her choices. She had thrown away every advantage they had provided her, squandered her education and breeding on a common laborer, and brought shame to the family name. They would not be providing any financial support or maintaining contact unless she came to her senses and returned to Boston where she belonged. Miranda read the letter twice, then set it down with trembling hands. She had known her parents would not approve, but seeing their rejection written in cold, formal language hurt more than she had anticipated. Graham found her sitting at the table with tears running down her face, and he immediately gathered her into his arms. "What happened?" he asked, then saw the letter. "May I read it?" Miranda nodded, and Graham read her father's words with increasing anger. When he finished, he tore the letter in half. "He is wrong," Graham said fiercely. "You did not throw anything away. You chose a life that makes you happy, a husband who loves and respects you, a future we are building together. That takes more courage than anything your parents ever did." "They think I married beneath myself," Miranda said, wiping her eyes. "They think you are just a common cowboy with no education or breeding." "I am a common cowboy with no education or breeding," Graham said honestly. "But I am also a man who would die for you, who will work myself to the bone to give you and our child a good life, who will never try to change you or diminish you. If that is not good enough for your parents, then they do not deserve to know us or our children." His words, delivered with such conviction and love, helped ease the pain of her parents' rejection. "You are right," Miranda said, taking a deep breath. "We do not need their approval. We have each other, and that is enough." "More than enough," Graham agreed, kissing her forehead. "We have everything that matters." As fall arrived and Miranda entered the final months of her pregnancy, preparations for the baby intensified. Martha Jenkins proved to be an invaluable resource, providing advice and hand-me-down baby clothes from her own grown children. Other women in the community also rallied around Miranda, creating a network of support that reminded her how strong frontier communities could be when they chose to look after their own. In late November, with her belly enormous and her movements awkward, Miranda moved into the Jenkins ranch house as planned. Graham visited every other day, staying overnight when he could, but he also had responsibilities at his own ranch that could not be neglected. The separation was difficult for both of them, but they knew it was necessary. "I will be there when the baby comes," Graham promised her on one of his visits. "Martha will send Billy to fetch me the moment you go into labor, and I will ride as fast as I can." "I know you will," Miranda said, holding him close despite the awkward bulk between them. "I am not worried. Everything will be fine." Labor began on a cold morning in late December, 2 days before Christmas. The pain started as mild cramps that Miranda initially dismissed as indigestion, but they quickly intensified into regular contractions that made her gasp. Martha immediately sent Billy riding hard for both Graham and Dr. Matthews, then settled down to help Miranda through the process. "I have delivered 6 babies of my own and helped with a dozen more," Martha said calmly, guiding Miranda through breathing exercises. "You are strong and healthy, and this baby is going to be just fine. But I will not lie to you, it is going to hurt like nothing you have ever experienced." She was right. The pain was intense and relentless, waves of agony that seemed endless. Miranda tried to be stoic, but eventually she was crying and screaming, clutching Martha's hands as her body worked to bring new life into the world. Time became meaningless, stretching and compressing in strange ways. She was only vaguely aware when Dr. Matthews arrived and took over the medical aspects of the birth, with Martha remaining to provide emotional support and encouragement. "I can see the head," Dr. Matthews announced. "Just a few more pushes, Mrs. Prescott. You are doing wonderfully." Miranda summoned every ounce of strength she possessed and pushed with everything she had. There was a moment of intense pressure and burning pain, and then suddenly, blessedly, a release. A baby's cry filled the room, loud and indignant and absolutely beautiful. "It is a boy," Dr. Matthews said with a smile, holding up the squalling infant. "A healthy baby boy." Through her tears and exhaustion, Miranda laughed with joy. "A son. She and Graham had a son. Is he truly healthy?" She asked anxiously. "All his fingers and toes. All present and accounted for," the doctor assured her, cleaning the baby and wrapping him in a blanket before placing him in Miranda's arms. "He is perfect." Miranda looked down at the tiny face, the dark blue eyes that would probably change color, the little fists waving angrily at being thrust into a cold world. She felt a love so fierce and overwhelming that it took her breath away. This was her child, hers and Graham's, a perfect blend of both of them. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "I am your mama and you are so loved." The door burst open and Graham rushed in, wild-eyed and covered in snow from his frantic ride. "Miranda, are you all right? Is the baby here?" "Come meet your son," Miranda said, smiling despite her exhaustion. Graham approached the bed slowly, almost reverently, and looked down at the baby in Miranda's arms. His expression transformed into something so tender and full of awe that Miranda felt fresh tears spring to her eyes. "Our son," he whispered. "We have a son." He reached out a tentative finger and the baby immediately grabbed it with surprising strength, making Graham laugh. "He is strong. Just like his father," Miranda said. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names previously but had not made a final decision. Graham looked thoughtful. "I always liked the name Garrett," he said. "Garrett Prescott. It sounds strong, substantial." "Garrett," Miranda repeated, testing it out. "I like it. Garrett Prescott, welcome to the world." They spent Christmas that year at the Jenkins Ranch, with Martha and her husband hosting a small celebration for the new family. It was different from any Christmas Miranda had ever experienced. There were no elaborate decorations or expensive gifts, just a simple tree decorated with strings of popcorn and paper ornaments, a modest meal, and the warmth of genuine friendship and community. But it was the best Christmas of Miranda's life, holding her newborn son while her husband sat beside her, his arm around her shoulders, looking at her like she had given him the greatest gift in the world. They returned to their own ranch in early January, once Miranda had recovered enough to make the journey. Settling into life with a newborn was challenging in ways Miranda had not fully anticipated. Garrett was a good baby for the most part, but he woke frequently to nurse and seemed to have his days and nights confused for the first few weeks. Miranda was constantly exhausted, and there were moments when she broke down crying from sheer fatigue and frustration. Graham helped as much as he could, walking the floor with Garrett when the baby was fussy, changing diapers, and taking over all the household chores so Miranda could focus on feeding and caring for their son. "We are a team," he reminded her during one particularly difficult night when Garrett would not stop crying and Miranda was on the verge of collapse. "I am not going to leave you to do this alone." Gradually, they found their rhythm. Garrett began sleeping for longer stretches at night, and Miranda learned to interpret his different cries and needs. She marveled at how quickly babies changed and grew, how Garrett seemed to develop new abilities almost daily. His eyes changed from newborn blue to a warm hazel that matched neither of his parents, making him uniquely himself. He began to smile, then to laugh, and each milestone felt like a triumph. As spring arrived again, bringing new life to the ranch, Miranda reflected on how much her life had changed in little more than a year. She had come to Wyoming as a frightened woman fleeing a broken engagement and her family's expectations, seeking independence and purpose through teaching. Instead, she had found something infinitely more valuable. She had found love, partnership, a true home, and a family of her own creation. "Do you ever regret not going to Montana?" Graham asked her one evening as they sat on the porch, watching Garrett crawl around on a blanket spread on the ground. "Not becoming a teacher like you planned." Miranda considered the question seriously. "I regret that those children in Montana had to wait longer for a teacher," she said honestly. "I hope someone else stepped up to fill that role, but regret my own choice? No, never. This is the life I was meant to have, even if I did not know it when I started that journey." "I used to be lonely out here," Graham admitted. "I told myself I was fine being alone, that I preferred solitude to dealing with people. But I was lying to myself. I was desperately lonely, and I did not even realize how bad it was until you came into my life and showed me what it felt like to truly share life with someone." "That blizzard was the best thing that ever happened to me," Miranda said, reaching over to take his hand. "It brought me to you." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching their son explore his world until Garrett let out a demanding cry that meant he was hungry. Miranda picked him up and settled into the rocking chair Graham had made for her as a gift after Garrett's birth, nursing the baby while Graham sat beside them, one hand resting on her shoulder in a gesture of unconscious tenderness. The years that followed brought both joys and challenges. The ranch grew gradually under Graham's careful management, expanding to 500 acres and nearly 100 head of cattle. They hired more help, including a foreman who allowed Graham to spend more time with his family. Garrett grew into a sturdy, adventurous boy with his father's love of the outdoors and his mother's quick mind and curiosity. When Garrett was 3 years old, Miranda discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier because she knew what to expect, though chasing after an energetic toddler while carrying another child proved exhausting. Their second son, Gabriel, was born in the summer of 1886, an easier birth than Garrett's had been. Gabriel was a quieter baby, more content to observe the world around him than his active older brother. 2 years later, they welcomed a daughter, Grace, who inherited her mother's dark hair and her father's gray eyes. With 3 children filling the ranch house with noise and laughter and chaos, Miranda often felt overwhelmed but never regretted her choices. She had wanted purpose and meaning in her life, and she had found it in abundance. Graham proved to be a devoted father, spending his evenings playing with the children, teaching them about the ranch and the animals, instilling in them a love for the land and a strong work ethic. But he also encouraged their education, asking Miranda to teach them reading and arithmetic from an early age. "I do not want them to be limited like I was," he told her. "They should have every opportunity to become whatever they want to be." Miranda established a small school in their home, teaching not only her own children, but also the children of their ranch hands and neighboring families. It was not the formal teaching position she had once imagined, but it fulfilled her desire to educate and shape young minds. She discovered that she was good at it, patient and creative in her methods, able to make learning engaging even for reluctant students. When Garrett was 10, a terrible drought struck the region. The grass withered and died, water sources dried up, and Graham's cattle began to die from lack of food and water. It was a desperate time, testing the family's resilience and resources. Graham worked tirelessly to save as many animals as possible, drilling new wells and hauling water from distant sources. The family ate sparingly, preserving their supplies in case the drought continued into another year. But through it all, they remained united. Miranda stood by Graham's side through the crisis, never complaining about the hardships or suggesting they give up and move elsewhere. The children, old enough to understand the seriousness of the situation, helped however they could, even little Grace doing her part by gathering eggs and weeding the garden. When the drought finally broke with a series of thunderstorms that turned the world green again, Graham collapsed on the porch in exhausted relief. "We made it," he said, pulling Miranda down beside him. "I did not think we would, but we made it." "We always make it," Miranda replied, resting her head on his shoulder, "because we have each other." The children grew and thrived, each developing their own personality and interests. Garrett inherited his father's love of ranching and announced at age 12 that he intended to take over the family ranch someday. Gabriel was more scholarly, devouring every book Miranda could acquire for him and talking about becoming a lawyer or doctor. Grace was passionate about animals, constantly bringing home injured creatures to nurse back to health, from baby birds to wounded rabbits. As Miranda entered her 40s, she watched her children growing toward adulthood and reflected on the unexpected path her life had taken. She had never returned to Boston, though she occasionally exchanged letters with a cousin who had defied the family to maintain contact. Her parents had both passed away without ever reconciling with her, a source of sadness but not regret. She had built a life rich with meaning and love, far beyond anything she could have imagined back in that stuffy Boston drawing room when she had accepted her first engagement. Graham had aged well, his face more weathered but his strength undiminished. Their love had deepened over the years, growing from the passionate urgency of new romance into something steadier and more profound. They knew each other completely now, every strength and weakness, every habit and quirk, and they loved each other not despite these things but because of them. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Graham surprised Miranda by taking her back to the line cabin where they had first met. It had been maintained over the years, still used occasionally when working the northern pastures, but now it held a special significance as the birthplace of their relationship. "I wanted to bring you back here," Graham said as they stood in the small space that seemed even smaller now than it had 2 decades ago. "To remind you and myself of where we started. You came through that door half frozen and desperate, and you gave me everything I did not know I needed. You gave me love, family, purpose, a reason to build something beyond just surviving. You made my life complete. Miranda felt tears spring to her eyes as she looked around the cabin, remembering that terrifying night and the man who had saved her life in more ways than one. "You saved me too," she said softly. "I was so lost, Graham. I thought I knew what I wanted, but I had no idea what would truly make me happy. You showed me. This life, these children, growing old with you on this land we have built together, this is everything I never knew I wanted." Graham pulled her into his arms, and they stood holding each other in the cabin that had sheltered them through that first storm. Outside, the Wyoming wind blew as it always had, but inside, they were warm and safe and together. The children married and started their own families. Garrett brought home a sweet-natured rancher's daughter named Emily, and they took over the daily management of the ranch while Graham transitioned into a more advisory role. Gabriel went to college back east, fulfilling his academic dreams, but he surprised everyone by returning to Wyoming with his wife Sarah, establishing a law practice in the growing town of Willow Creek. Grace married a veterinarian and they settled nearby, working together to provide medical care for both livestock and pets throughout the region. As grandchildren arrived, Miranda and Graham found themselves at the center of a growing family. Sunday dinners became a tradition, with children and grandchildren gathering at the original ranch house for meals that stretched for hours, filled with laughter and storytelling, and the comfortable chaos of multiple generations together. "We did good," Graham said to Miranda one evening after everyone had left and they sat alone on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. "Look at what we built. Not just the ranch, but this family. These good people who love each other and know how to work hard and care about things that matter." "We did very good," Miranda agreed, taking his hand. His fingers were gnarled now with arthritis, his hair completely white, but his grip was still strong and sure. "I am proud of all of them, and I am proud of us." In their later years, as their health began to decline, Miranda and Graham remained devoted to each other. When Graham's heart began to fail, Miranda nursed him with the same dedication she had shown to their children, and the injured animals Grace brought home. When Miranda developed pneumonia one harsh winter, Graham sat by her bedside day and night until the fever broke and she recovered. "We are going to grow old and die together," Graham told her with certainty. "I refuse to live in a world without you in it." "Then we had better take good care of each other," Miranda replied, "because I am not ready to leave this world yet. I want to see our great-grandchildren grow up." They got their wish. The years continued to pass, bringing more weddings and births, losses and celebrations, the natural rhythm of life on a ranch and in a large family. Miranda continued teaching until she was in her 70s, finally retiring when her eyes grew too weak to read easily. Graham worked the ranch until he was 80, only stopping when his children literally took away his horse and told him it was time to let the younger generation handle the physical labor. On a warm spring evening in 1918, when Miranda was 70 years old and Graham was 73, they sat together on the porch as they had done thousands of times before. The ranch spread out before them, green and thriving, with cattle dotting the pastures and horses grazing near the barn. In the distance, they could see Garrett and Emily's house, smoke rising from the chimney as Emily prepared dinner for their family. "You remember that night I found you in the blizzard?" Graham asked, his voice weaker now but still warm with affection. "I remember every detail," Miranda replied. "I remember thinking I was going to die, and then suddenly there you were, catching me as I fell. My guardian angel in cowboy boots." Graham chuckled. "I was no angel, just a lonely cowboy who got incredibly lucky when a beautiful, intelligent woman literally fell into his arms." "We both got lucky," Miranda said, leaning against him carefully. That storm brought me to your door, and you offered me shelter from more than just the weather. You offered me a home, a future, a love I did not know existed. I did not actually say stay until spring, stay forever that first night, Graham pointed out with a smile. But I was thinking it. From the moment you opened your eyes and looked at me, I was thinking it. I know, Miranda said softly. I could see it in your face. And part of me was thinking the same thing, even though it made no logical sense. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. In the gathering dusk, their children and grandchildren began arriving for a family dinner, celebrating Graham and Miranda's 50th wedding anniversary. The house would soon fill with voices and laughter, with children running and adults talking, with the love and life that they had created together. 50 years, Graham marveled. Half a century with you, and it still does not feel like enough time. Then we will have to ask for more, Miranda said, squeezing his hand. Because I am not done loving you yet, Graham Prescott, not by a long shot. As their family gathered around them, celebrating the love story that had started with a blizzard and a chance meeting, Miranda looked at her husband's face and saw the same devotion and tenderness that had been there that first night when he pulled her from the storm. They had built a beautiful life together, full of hard work and simple joys, of children raised and land tended, of love given and received in equal measure. The snowstorm had brought her to his door all those years ago, and he had asked her to stay. She had stayed forever, and forever had been the greatest adventure of her life. As the evening stars began to appear in the darkening sky and their family surrounded them with love and celebration, Miranda knew with absolute certainty that she would make the same choice again, every single time. This was the life she was meant to live, with this man in this place, building this family. And it was more wonderful than any dream she could have imagined in that fancy Boston drawing room so many years ago. The story that had begun in desperate circumstances in a frozen Wyoming wilderness had become a legacy of love, family, and enduring partnership that would continue through generations to come. And at the heart of it, all were two people who had found each other against all odds and chosen to build a life together, proving that sometimes the best paths are the ones we never planned to take, and the greatest loves are the ones that take us completely by surprise.